Saw friends, it's me, Matt. Welcome back to Hobby Vomit. Today, I am very excited to be reviewing Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. You probably have seen me this book on many weekly retches because it's a freaking chonker, but I did it, I finished it, and I want to talk about it. So, Speaks the Nightbird. Let me talk about our review process here on Hobby Vomit. We're going to be going through our BARF system to review this book. Basically, 4 categories we're going to go through. B is believable. How believable are the characters and their setting? A is appeal. How appealing is the book? R is rhythm, which deals with plotting and pacing. And then F is feeling. What did the book make me feel? Or how did the book make me feel, if it made me feel at all? And then I'll give you a score and sell. So I'm going to be doing all 4 of those in a spoiler-free way. I'll give you a final score, and then I'll pitch the book to you, essentially, and then I'll go back through these categories in a spoiler-filled section and kind of deep dive a little bit more into that. I'm still figuring out my way here with reviews, so I'm not sure. I did take a few little notes that I'll be referencing here and there, but a lot of it's just going to be off the cuff. So, like always, I'm going to start by reading the back of the book, essentially, just to give you an idea of what this book is about. This is by Robert McCammon. This is the first book in his Matthew Corbett series. Now, this is my first Robert McCammon book that I have finished. I did start A Boy's Life, which is one of his more well-known books, but we had to put our pup down last year, and you know, I've heard that can be a tough book to read after doing that. So I put it down temporarily, and yeah. So I wanted to still read Robert McCammon because I really loved what I had read in Boy's Life, and I was wanting to do this read-along with the Shelf Esteem read-along, essentially. You know, I've talked about that a little bit as well, where there was 3 very large series I committed to. I'm probably not going to continue them, at least not keep up the pace with them. I just find myself not having the time, especially because every book's like a freaking chonker. Big boys. So let me read you the back of this book. Robert McCammon. Here we go. And I will say, I know I keep interrupting myself. If you get this book, I'm going to read. You see how there's like 2 little paragraphs there? If you ever pick this book up, I'm not going to read you the bottom paragraph, and I encourage you not to, because this book was originally released as 2 books, a part 1 and a part 2, so kind of split right down the middle. Now, the top paragraph here gives you the synopsis of part 1, and unfortunately, I don't know why they made this decision, but the second paragraph tells you the synopsis of part 2, which inherently spoils part 1, the ending of part 1, which is crazy to me because I read it and spoiled myself about what was going to happen halfway through this book. So don't do that. You know, it shouldn't be on you or us as the reader. I have no idea why that got passed through by the publisher because it makes no sense. So I'm only going to read you the first paragraph because I don't want to spoil half the book for you. So here we go. Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. So part 1 is called Judgment of the Witch. And it says, The Carolinas, 1699. The citizens of Fount Royal believe a witch has cursed their town with inexplicable tragedies, and they demand that beautiful widow Rachel Howarth be tried and executed for witchcraft. Presiding over the trial is traveling magistrate Isaac Woodward, aided by his astute young clerk Matthew Corbett. Believing in Rachel's innocence, Matthew will soon confront the true evil at work in Fount Royal. So yeah, that's kind of what we are getting into. It's a historical fiction dealing with a witch in a town in the Carolinas, and Matthew Corbett is it's interesting because it's called the Matthew Corbett series, and Matthew Corbett is the main character, but he kind of branches into the main character as it goes, because Isaac Woodward is also a main-ish character. But yeah, there are these 2 traveling people who come to this town from England to basically hold a trial for this supposed witch. And so, yeah, that's a synopsis. So now I'm going to get into my BARF review. So here we go. Believable. I gave this a 5 out of 5. So how believable were the characters in their setting? I'd heard, and I read a little bit of Boy's Life, so I got a little taste of Robert McCammon's character work, but I know that he is also known for great character work. Wow. Yeah. His character work is insanely good. It reminds me a lot of Stephen King, where it's just, I felt like I was reading real characters. And there's a lot of characters in this book, just like any, it's almost like a murder mystery because people, they have accused this witch because people have been murdered and there's some evidence against her and things like that. And so they're trying to solve this case to see if she really is a witch or if there's something else going on. And so like a lot of murder mysteries, there's a large cast of characters. I'd say like as far as like main characters go, there's probably about 10 in this book. And all of them feel very different, mostly. There's a couple as we got to the town that there's like 4 or 5 main characters in the town that start similar. They don't have as I read more, obviously, they kind of differentiated themselves. But at first, it was a lot to take in, a lot of characters, because these are like real characters. I've read there's a murder mystery called like the Spindle Manor. Essentially, it's like a fantasy murder mystery, and with that, characters are a lot more differentiable because they have fantasy, one of them's like a steampunk general. One of them can teleport or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's easy to associate that where like this is in a settlement in the Carolinas in 1699. So it's like one of them's a school teacher, one of them's a doctor. But like as far as what they do outside of that, it's very, very similar. So it took a little bit for them to kind of branch out. But once they did, I think every character here felt very just believable. I mean, I talk about that with Stephen King all the time. It just felt like I knew these characters, and I loved reading their journey throughout the book. So yeah, 5 out of 5. I loved Matthew and Woodward's relationship. It's kind of like a father-son relationship. I thought that was handled really well. I love the way all the characters bounced off each other. That's what makes it so great, is you're in the heads of a couple of them, but getting their dialogues with, if one person's in a room with Matthew and they're talking, that conversation feels very different than if 3 of them are in a room with Matthew talking, and just what they know, and everyone's a little bit sus at times. I myself as the reader, I was along for the ride for the mystery. I had no idea what was going to be the solution. So I thought that was great. So yeah, believable. I thought the characters were a 5 out of 5. So moving on to appeal, I gave this a 4.5 out of 5. What do I find appealing about this book? It's insanely good character work, which I've already touched on. A great plot. I think it kept me on the edge of my seat for 800 pages, and that's very hard to do, I think. Like, there's not really a lull in this book. Maybe a little bit, which is why I knocked it a little bit. There's a certain thing I'll talk about more and maybe in rhythm about that something that hurt it a little bit for me. But it's also really easy to read. So it's 800 pages, but unlike, Malazan or Wars of Light and Shadow, you kind of can just coast through this like a Stephen King, and it's impressive to me of how easy it was to read. And I think his prose is great as well. And so I actually pulled out just an example of something that stood out to me as just good writing. And so I've got a couple quotes here. This isn't a spoiler. It just happens. Matthew is traveling in essentially like kind of like the jungle. And so here's what it says. There's a couple, 3 in a row, but they kind of bounce off each other. So the first one is just, the land was God and devil both. That's the whole sentence. But like, that already says so much, right? One sentence, the land was God and devil both. Yeah, I mean, you can already know, the land is beautiful, but it's also extremely harsh. So then he kind of expands off of that a little bit later, a couple paragraphs later. It says, but the land was God and devil both, Matthew mused, because it was so beautiful and frighteningly, I can't say that word, frighteningly vast in the sunny hours. But in the night, he knew, the demons of the unknown would creep to their pine stick fire and whisper terrors beyond the circle of light. Love that. And then one more. God spoke to Matthew and told him of a country almost too grand to imagine. The devil spoke in his other ear and told him such tremendous, fearful expanse and space would be seeded by the bones of some future generation. And that kind of descriptive writing, right? It's easy to read. It's easy to understand. Still makes you think a little bit. But man, it's just beautifully written. And you're getting a whole book of that. And yeah, I just think, to me, that boosted the appeal of this book to me. Because sometimes, it's not, too purpley can be a bad thing for me, but then too simple can also be a bad thing for me. And I think this just walks that line perfectly. So you're getting great character work, you're getting an awesome mystery, and you're getting beautiful prose. I think it's a 4 out of 5 or 4.5 out of 5 for me for appeal. Rhythm, plot, and pacing, I gave this a 4.75 out of 5. I think it's, pedal to the metal. It's slow, but it's also pedal to the metal. I don't know how to explain it. You're so invested in this mystery and all the characters that there's no scene that you don't want to be there for. Every scene, I'm like, and there's so many characters, right? Matthew will jump around from character to character, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's this character. I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't seen this character in a while, and so much has changed. Now I can look at them in a new light, and there's just no wasted time in this book, with one exception. In my opinion, there's one thing that happens. I can't really talk about it in the spoiler-free section, unfortunately. I just think the case takes a turn at a certain point. And, I'm not the type of person that I love theorizing and like trying to figure out, obviously, I think a lot of people do, right? I love to try and figure out who committed the murders or if Rachel was actually guilty or what. I love trying to figure that out. And I'm okay if I'm wrong, right? I don't care if I'm wrong. If I get to the review and I'm wrong or I'm right. I see it all the time where people, for whatever reason, when people are right about figuring out a plot point, that means it's bad to them. And I don't understand that at all. Just because you guessed it doesn't mean it's bad. As long as it's told in a good way, that's the story. So that's my opinion, at least. I don't care if I'm right or if I'm wrong, but it kept me guessing the whole time. And yeah, there was one point where it did take a turn, though, and that's kind of what I want to talk about. Is like, it wasn't that I was wrong and that's why I didn't like it. I just don't think it felt very in character for the main character or this type of story. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just felt like it didn't feel like cheap, but it felt a little cheap. So I can't say much more than that. And honestly, it's a very small part, and it almost earns that. It still almost earns it. It feels like I felt a little disappointed, and I was like, man, I don't know if this is about a quarter of the way left. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna really love the ending of this book because of this. But he surprised me, and I think it earned that change that I didn't love. I still don't love it, but I think the rest of the book ended so strongly that it still only gave it I still gave it a 4.75 out of 5, right? Yeah. So 4.7 out of 5 for rhythm. It's expertly paced, I will say. I mean, my goodness. It's just a page turner, an 800-page page turner, which is pretty wild. And then feeling, I gave this also a 4.7 out of 5. Man, and I think this kind of comes with good character work. Usually the feeling is going to be highly rated as well, because good character work, you get in their head and you love them and like their relationships and this book made me laugh. It made me scared. It made me tense. It made me cry. It's just the whole range of emotions, and it's masterfully done. And so, yeah, a 4.7 out of 5 for feeling. So, yeah, my final score, so we'll get to the score and sell, that averaged out to a 4.75 out of 5, a near perfect book. And, yeah, my pitch is, even if you've never read, this is my first historical fiction, so even if you've never read historical fiction, if you're into like murder mystery or just really incredible character work, I would highly recommend this book. It is long, certainly, but I think if your tastes kind of align with me, I think if this is your first Robert McCammon book, he will I think you're going to read a lot more Robert McCammon, including myself. I will be reading a lot more Robert McCammon after this because it's kind of insane to me how, I mean, I'm sure he is a big name, but like I mean, we'll see as I read more. But if he's got a whole catalog of books like this, he deserves to be up there with like a Stephen King, in my opinion. It's just that good. And like historical fiction was never something I was interested in, and I don't love murder mystery as I've talked about, but man, he just does it so well with the characters that I was in. And history is I don't like history. I'm not a big history buff, I will say. But I loved being in this part of America during this time period in this book. It was super, super well done. So that's my sell. I think, I think everyone should try this. I think you'll be hooked. I think you'll be hooked within the first 2 chapters. And I think it will keep you hooked the entire way. So yeah, 4.7 out of 5 for Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon, the first book in the Matthew Corbett series. And now I am going to get more into spoiler territory. So if you've not read this book, please stop watching. Or if you don't care about spoilers, sure, go ahead and continue. So let's get back into characters. So again, spoilers. I don't have any notes for this. I'm going to kind of just go off the cuff. But man, so many good characters and great villains, I will say. Matthew obviously is our main character. I really liked Matthew. I did really like Matthew. I think he was my biggest problem in the book as well, which sounds kind of funny, but some of the I'll talk about this later too, but I just didn't like the romance side of this book. I didn't feel like it was earned. Part of me can understand he's a very young man. He's a virgin. He sees this beautiful woman, I guess. So now he's in love with her. He spends the night with her, a couple nights with her in jail, and gets to talk to her. And I get that because he has spent. I just wish it was like he wanted to do the right thing because it was the right thing. I didn't like that he was doing the right thing because he was in love with this woman. That it just feels a little cheap to me. I don't know. It just didn't feel necessary either. Take that out and the book doesn't change at all, except for maybe for the better, in my opinion. I just really didn't like it. I didn't like it. Yeah, I just didn't like it because it just cheapens that for justice. I'm doing the right. I'm going against my fatherly figure. I'm going against the whole town because I'm doing what's right. And also because I love her. I'm just like, Matthew. But also it's like, right, I get it. He's young. He's not really developed fully all the way. And so like I want to get it. I just don't find I don't find that it was necessary. I think there were ways to show that he was young and could make mistakes in better ways. So Matthew is my biggest problem. But I still really loved that side of him, or the side of him that was trying to do the right thing because it was the right thing to do, right? I love that. I love his question. I love his curiosity and the way that his brain works. And that's the other reason why the romance, it just doesn't seem like that those two parts of the brain are from the same person. But, it is what it is. Woodward loved Woodward. Is it Woodward? Why does it sound weird now that I'm saying it? It's Isaac Woodward, right? Yeah. Loved Woodward, and I loved their relationship, the fatherly relationship. And man, the ending with them is just, it's so sad. And you know it's going to happen. You know it's going to happen. The whole freaking book. The first time he coughs, I was like, uh-oh. What's going to happen here with Isaac? And yeah, I mean, talk about writing a good death with just like the way the brain starts to shut down. It was beautiful. I mean, it's giving me goosebumps when I'm thinking about it. And yeah, just a beautiful scene. But I love their relationship too. A very father-son, but they argue. And yeah, I mean, there were times I hated Woodward, but intentionally, right? I think that's what Robert McCammon wanted you to do. And say with Bidwell, it's like, I get what you're doing, my dude, because this is like your baby, this town. But oh my gosh, just shut up and listen to Matthew for a second, please. Because, I get it, right? This was right after the witch trials, and people believed that women were witches, which is, living in 2025 or whatever. It's insane. It's insanity. But back then, that was just like a thing they were figuring out. And so I get it. But I thought he was an incredible character, Bidwell. And then yeah, like the three people that I got confused for a little bit were Johnstone, Shields, and Winston. So Winston is kind of like the number two to Bidwell. Shields is the doctor, and Johnstone was the school teacher. And at first, when you're first meeting everybody, it's just like you're just getting introduced to so many characters, and I couldn't remember who was who so much. But then obviously, as Shields starts treating Woodward, and then Johnstone's got the knee thing that you're starting to figure out, and then Winston's kind of just gone for a little bit, and then he comes back in. But great characters. The rat catcher, oh my gosh, his little song that he sings to his rats about the candies. Oh, it's great. And I liked Rachel. I thought I wouldn't say she was like my favorite character or anything, but I liked her mostly. I also didn't. I don't know the relationship she has with Matthew. I'm so conflicted on it. There's things that I like about it, and there's things I really don't like about it. And yeah, unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it is. So yeah, that's kind of where I'll stop with character work. We'll talk more about it as we go. But appeal, there's not, yeah, like normal, right? Believable and rhythm are going to be the two things I talk about the most here. Appeal, yeah, I mean, not much to say as far as like spoilers. I loved that the bear came back. It was kind of cool. It was cool to see Matthew out in nature. Well, actually, you know what? Let's just get into rhythm because I'm going to talk about my single biggest problem, the disconnect I had in this case. The thing that's great about murder mysteries is that in the 11th hour, there's a revelation, right? And that revelation, you as the reader, it's like, oh, it's so obvious. It was right there. And I kept waiting for this because the time was running out for Rachel to get burned at the stake after she gets sentenced as a witch. And I just didn't love that the solution was, well, I don't know, so we're just going to run away. And like maybe that's a subversion of tropes and that's a cool thing. Maybe it is. I didn't love it. I didn't love that he didn't figure it out. And I'm sure that, right, that's why I'm so conflicted on it. It's like I get that he's young and he's making mistakes and he can't solve this just yet. And so I like that, but I didn't like that the answer was to just run away. Run away from your problems. So it bothered me a little bit, but like I was saying, I think once they did run away and I got to see the rest of the book, it kind of felt a lot more deserved after that. Like, I get why he did it. I just didn't like the actual act of it. But yeah, once they got out there with the bear, Jack One Eye, them meeting the Native Americans and seeing Shawcombe again was awesome. And then, right, that's when you get the realization of the spring and the flow of the treasure underneath it and what's been happening to the treasure. And yeah, I get all that. And that's a fun revelation. But speaking of when he goes out there and my not liking, I just don't like their relationship, Rachel and Matthew. I think that everything could have stayed the same without the romance, right? And like I hated the sex scene. Sex scenes in books don't bother me. And like again, it's so interesting because there's a lot of times in books where I'm like, I don't like that, and I can define why I don't, and that was the author's choice, and I didn't like that author's choice. But here it's like it's almost like a fever dream that Matthew has, and like after the fact you kind of find out, like, was it real or was it not? Was he just having a hallucination, or was it part of, you know what I mean? Like, did they actually have sex? I don't know. But man, I hated reading it in the moment, and like I just wish the romance wasn't there. Let him save her because it's the right thing to do. And there can be a love between them. Like, a love, but it doesn't have to be a romantic love. And I just didn't like it. I don't feel like it felt like it was earned. It didn't feel like she should have that type of romantic love towards him. And he certainly shouldn't have that type of romantic love towards her. And it was just not like a romance I was rooting for at all. And luckily, I like the way it resolves with them. Obviously it's a 10-book series, so I wasn't expecting them to get married or anything. I just didn't like it. So sorry to rant about that, but that really was my biggest and only problem with the book. It was so good. I was recommending to friends, and then I hit that part where it was like the solution was to just like run away, and I was like, I don't really like that. And then they do run away, and then like they have sex, and I'm just like, what's happening? Like this is just feels weird. But then it wraps up so strong, and like that relationship kind of gets grounded a little bit more, and you find out maybe they didn't actually have sex, and maybe it was just like a moment in time where they felt hopeless, and I don't know, but wasn't really a fan. Obviously not enough to where I didn't knock it more than a 0.25, but it definitely had an impact on me that I was like, ugh. So that was that, but the rest of the pacing and plot points were awesome. I mean, like we start with Stockholm. We start with a serial killer. I mean, like what's more to love? So I loved that, and it didn't. All I knew was this: they were going to like basically a town where there was a witch, and so I wasn't expecting like a serial killer in the first like 2 chapters, and then for that to come back round circle, and he gets messed up. With like all of his limbs are gone, it's just a torso and just like, and yeah, and honestly, like I like that moment with Matthew, how he kind of wants them to put him out of his misery. He's like, there's a too far. There's a moment where you need to be merciful, even to someone like Stockholm, which is great, and yeah, so that's good. And then there's kind of like 2 mysteries happening at once, right? There's the fires. And so I love that side mystery with Winston. And that is also one more like a little bit weird thing to me with Matthew, like someone that he's so defiant against Woodward, because he's like I'm willing to do anything for justice, if I feel like it's right. And then Winston, who's like burning down houses which are leading them to basically accuse Rachel of witchcraft. He's like, you're a good guy, Winston. I'm going to let you go this time. And like, I don't know. Like, I get, right, there's like those types of crimes. He's doing the crime because, to me, it's not even like it's a justified crime. Same with Shields, because Shields like murders some guy, and it's like, yes, he had kind of, it's not even a good reason, but like I can understand why he committed that murder and how he's feeling that guilt now, and like, but he still committed murder. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he still should be tried, but Matthew's like, nah. Well, just take care of Woodward and we're good. And then Winston is just like burning down houses. He's like, well, I don't really like Bidwell either, so we'll let you go, and hopefully you'll get a little bit more money out of him. And like, I'm just like, wait a minute, Matthew, who are you? So are you just doing this for Rachel because she's like a hot woman that you saw naked, or are what side of the law are you on? You know what I mean? So kind of bugged me a little bit, but I like the resolution, right? Like I wanted that for Winston as well. I'm a little torn on how I feel about Matthew and making those decisions. And that certainly could just be, right, he's young, and he's figuring it all out. And I think that's why it's okay for me, mostly. But loved the rat catcher. I loved when Matthew went to, oh my gosh. So all these moments are coming back. When Matthew goes to jail, he goes into that barn, he finds the sack, and then he has a huge fight with the blacksmith. He goes to jail. Love that he goes to jail. Love that the testimonies are in jail. And then the rat catchers comes, and you get to introduce them to the rat catcher. Then he gets whipped, and he's like, yeah, but something's up with the blacksmith. I'm telling you, that clothes pile, it wasn't a pile of clothes. And then you find out that the blacksmith's just like having sex with his horses, and a huge mystery reveal, but so insignificant when you're looking at the case that it was a great reveal. But you're like, oh my gosh, like what? Who thinks of this? And that, oh man, yeah, it was just a funny reveal, but also horrifying. So that was great. Yeah, I thought all the plot point, it just was so masterfully paced that he gave us those little drops of things, and whenever it was starting to slow down, he'd introduce more conflict or separate conflict, even just conflict between, and Woodward's sickness. I mean, that whole thing, that carries the book for me. I mean, like, yeah, it's just such a. I think the scariest scene of this book was the scene where Shields has to come to Bidwell's house to treat Woodward. It was terrifying. His throat's closing up, and they have to like attach like the blister suckers to his back, and I mean, like, I was like, oh, he's just gonna die right here, and they're bleeding him and stuff, and man, it just was terrifying, that scene, and just everything about his sickness was just frightening. But then Bidwell's like taking advantage of that and telling Shields like, hey, I don't care what you have to do. You need to get this man to the jail to hear the witnesses, because we need this witch to burn, because Bidwell truly believed that the witch was causing his baby, Fount Royal, to fail. I liked Bidwell's like finale, right, when he realized that he was wrong. I thought he handled it really well. He wasn't really that bitter, and he even offers Matthew a job, but they were kind of still bickering about it, which I thought was great because it just felt right for their characters. But yeah, I think the guilt is going to be with him for a very long time. But yeah, Woodward's sickness was terrifying. The first time he visits Dr. Shields, I thought, speaking of like feeling, that was like one of the funniest moments to me. He goes to the doctor and he's like, this is in 1699, so modern medicine wasn't around then. They're still like figuring stuff out. And so Shields was basically like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. Here, let me just put something on your throat and we'll numb it. And so he's like, wow, that's better. He's like, hey, I'm going to help you with your breathing too. Here, smoke this. And I was just like, that's weird. And so he's like, I'll smoke one too. Why not? And so him and the magistrate get like super high together, which is already funny. But then in their conversation, Shields kind of leans over and he whispers, he's like, hey, you want to know something funny? Half the time, I have no idea what I'm doing. And they're like chuckling and laughing about that. I'm like, this is hilarious. The doctor's like confiding in his patient who he just treated, that half the time he has no idea what he's doing, which is just, I love that. I thought it was very funny. It made me laugh out loud. So I thought Shields was a great character with the doctor. I mean, he's guilty. Johnstone's guilty. I mean, they're all guilty of something, right? Bidwell, he hasn't actually done anything, but the false accusation and him like basically saying, I don't care about Woodward's health. Get him there because we need to burn this witch. When obviously he's wrong. That's wrong. But then as actual crimes, Winston's burning down the houses. Shields murders somebody. And then Johnstone's obviously the big bad. Him and the rat catcher the whole time were the big bad. And yeah, it's just like, I found that really interesting. And normally in a murder mystery, I'm like, okay, well, who's the bad guy? And Johnstone had the fake knee, which it's even inspected at some point briefly, and they pass it. They're like, oh yeah, he definitely has a fake knee. But nope, he didn't. It was fake. And that whole scene was great when Matthew outs them. And the star of the book, Mrs. Nettles, I mean, she's awesome. I love Mrs. Nettles. She kind of took care of Matthew and helped him in a ton of ways. I mean, this mystery would not be solved without Mrs. Nettles. She's kind of the goat. Yeah, loved Mrs. Nettles. So I think that's all I really have to say. A damn near perfect book. A couple things I didn't agree with, but I tried to rate in a fair way where it was like, even though I don't agree with it, I can see why he maybe made those decisions with the exception of I truly just don't think the romance needed to be there. I think this book would be a 5 out of 5 without the romance. I could get past the running away from the problem, right? Time is running out. And he's like, well, if we need to run away to buy some more time, then that's what we're going to have to do. So I get it. I don't like that, but I get it. But the romance part of it, I just don't think it was necessary in any way. I didn't find it very believable in any way, even though it gets to the point where it's like, whoa, was it? I don't want a will they, won't they in this situation. I just wasn't interested in that. But the other relationships were so strong. Him and Woodward, Matthew and Woodward's relationship was so strong that it overshadowed it so much. It just was a small blip that kind of hurt for me. So, yeah, that is my review of Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. Thank you so much for watching if you are still here. If you're still here, you've probably read it, so I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. We will catch you next time here on Hobby Vomit. Thank you. Goodbye.